and welcome to our expert panelists. I'm actually very excited by the opportunity to dissect this topic with three panel speakers who not just have a world of depth and gravitas in the industry, but also can comment upon it from very different perspectives. I'll start by addressing essentially a question that three people in the audience have already asked me. What do you mean by leapfrogging diagnostics, right? What exactly do you want to cover here? And essentially what we want to cover is how do we make significant advancements in diagnostics without necessarily following the conventional, tried and true linear path. And specifically in this topic, what we want to touch upon is the role that new technologies and also new commercial models could play to bridge the diagnostic divide. Now, I use this term, diagnostic divide, very deliberately, and the three of you probably understand it much better than me, because there are two major factors at play here. One is the supply constraint on infrastructure and access. And the first panel touched upon it, but 6,000 radiologists in a country as big as ours, one pathologist for 65,000 people, that's, it needs to be 35 times that to meet, say, the WHO norms. 2% of our labs are NABL accredited. And so we clearly have, a meaningful supply constraint that we need to unlock. But linked to that is also the demand challenge, right? And we talk very proudly about India's economic growth and prowess. We've become the 5th largest economy. We have a great demographic dividend. But linked to that economic progress is also just a very big change in the disease profile that we see. We already have an incredibly high infectious disease burden, but we also are seeing now non-communicable diseases becoming very meaningful. In fact, I was surprised. 2/3 of the death in the country are now from NCDs. And so clearly, the objective of this discussion is to talk about how do we see the next 5 or 10 years of the industry play out, and how can we leapfrog to bridge this diagnostic divide between the supply constraint and a rapidly growing demand. The first panel touched upon the demand aspect by way of primary care and how that really needs to be further expanded. But there's a massive role that the diagnostic industry has as well. And I thought to touch upon this discussion in 3 sections. One is to talk about the state of play today. Where are we as an industry? The second is to talk about technological innovation, right, which is the core of what we'd like to cover. And the third is probably most relevant for a lot in the audience, and they'd be excited to get your perspectives on, is future outlook, right, and what's next for the industry. And so maybe we can start there, and Sanjay, maybe I can start with you. You've obviously had a great experience of running a large diagnostic lab business. You've seen this industry evolve. I'd be very curious if you could touch upon what have been some compelling trends in the last few years, especially. How have the volumes for specialized testing evolved, especially after the pandemic? And what are diagnostic laboratories changing, say, by way of their test menus or their approaches to address this change in the test mix itself?
Thank you, Ashish. Just to answer the question which you were asked by 3 people, what do you mean by leapfrogging? So I guess, before COVID, no one knew what did RT-PCR stand for or mean. Today, everybody knows that. So I think that's in a way leapfrogging, that from people who probably never got a lipid profile done, that is your basic cholesterol test, to now everybody knowing what is RT-PCR, I guess that to some extent is leapfrogging. But to answer your question, I think India is, as from my vantage point, I've seen India is always a land of extremes. So you have malnourishment on one side, and then you have obesity on the other side. You have people who want high-end testing, and then you have people who are dying of tuberculosis and malaria. So I think that's the challenge that we face in India today, that even if I was to go back and see over the last 30 years that I've been part of the diagnostics industry, have the testing volumes changed in the type of tests that we did? And you would realize that it's still, the basic tests that still are at the top of the pyramid. That, your basic CBC or your lipid profile or thyroid test or liver function, kidney function still remain. And that to some extent, I guess, is reflective of the fact that all the new entrants that have come over the last 3 years have also focused only on that test menu. of course, thanks to some people who have focused on, the evolving trends. So I think we've seen labs, when I started out, maybe about 200,000 labs. Today, maybe it's about 300,000 labs. Uh, the lot of evolution of testing that has moved from basic to what we call a semi-specialized, specialized, and then high-end testing. And where we have seen success is that a lab that has grown from bottom up, that somebody who's had a pyramid of testing where they have a pipeline which is available. So you go from basic to semi-specialized to specialized to super specialized. And then you put in the top of the pyramid, which is your genomic testing or the molecular diagnostics. Whereas somebody else who's just come directly at the top and only looked at specialty, super specialty, but testing, is finding it difficult to sort of address the opportunity in the market because they don't have that pipeline. So I think labs that have had the pipeline will probably see success because of that pipeline. Labs that are only looking at the very niche segment on the top will find it difficult because the pipeline is not there. But the opportunity exists. I think the movement from, I think we've, throughout the afternoon and evening, we've spoken about how decentralization from urban to rural or tier 1, tier 2, tier 3, I think that's the opportunity which is there, and I think point of care testing plays a significant role there. I think the whole leverage of technology, telemedicine, saw a big upsurge during COVID, but I think it's sort of, it's petering down now, but there's still a big opportunity there. And as you also mentioned, I think this whole dichotomy between having a very high infectious disease burden, but yet having a very high non-communicable disease burden, I think. So the opportunity really exists across all segments. It's about how you're building that pipeline and how you want to service it. I think there's clearly an opportunity for labs to just move along that curve. And we've seen a lot of that happening, that people are moving from routine to specialized to super specialized and then high-end testing today.
Sanjay, I'd like to build on the point that you just raised, which is about laboratories moving up that value chain, and maybe Shravan, I could address the next question to you in that light, which is given your unique vantage point, you've seen pretty much the best of what the global MNCs have to offer by way of new age testing, automation, technology. You've chosen and evaluated what's best fit for purpose in India. Now, if I was to take a slightly controversial or cynical view, there is a school of thought that says, look, the industry has been slow to adopt technology. The industry is CapEx shy. The industry looks at the manual technology arbitrage very closely, and so willingness to pay is a challenge. I'd love to get your perspectives on A, are the cynics right? And B, what are the pockets in the industry that you see increased willingness to pay for technology adoption? And is that really meaningfully accelerating, or is that still, well short of where it needs to be?
Yeah. Thanks, Ashish. And I think it's important to have cynics in the crowd, right, that motivate us to prove them wrong and really look at new solutions. When we consider automation, for example, there's been this whole drive towards consolidation. And just when we started consolidating, there's now a drive towards point of care. And when we move towards that direction, people are saying, okay, wearables is where it's at. But let's follow the patient for a moment and then see where the patient journey and then the workflow generated from the patient journey takes us. If you look at a lab or a diagnostic center or an imaging center, there are so many touch points that lend themselves to technology and automation. We can look at preclinical, what is the experience for the patient as their, an informed patient is an empowered patient, and what role does technology play there? Once a sample comes in, or once a patient comes in to provide a sample or to be scanned, what is the opportunity for automation there? How can we scale that up? And then a lot of the conversation that we have had traditionally has been around the instrumentation, right? How can I make it faster? How can I make it better? How can I improve the quality? But really where it makes all the difference is what do you do with that data afterwards, right? So we're seeing a lot of action also now in clinical decision support tools. What am I doing with all the data? How can I personalize my healthcare approach for a patient? How can I automate the process of obtaining the data and then adding layers on that and make an informed decision around that. I see Vidur Mahajan checking his email for the latest trends in AI. But those are the kind of tools that are being developed now to utilize democratized data.
And are you seeing willingness to pay for these, Shravan? Are you seeing like the providers and the hospitals and the ecosystem at large willing to pay both for this as well as for advanced capex?
Yeah, I think Joy mentioned earlier today about the Bharat versus India divide. So I see a little bit of that. By and large, people are willing to pay where the therapeutic area lends itself to paying for solutions that are automated. See, oncology, for example, is one area where I'm seeing some of that. Maternal health, chronic disease is also seeing a good amount of investment going towards that space. There is certainly a divide between urban and rural India when it comes to the willingness or the affordability to pay for it. But it's not just affordability of a product, right? It's the overall access to healthcare argument that we're trying to solve for. So can automation drive access to healthcare? And every time you automate one process, you're going to find another rate limiting step. It could be in skills. Today, I could drop a PET MR machine in Pollachi, but I'll have nobody to operate it. Right? So we need the skills to operate automation. We need skilled clinicians to interpret the results that come forth with and then be able to make a decision based on that. So also, I think a huge opportunity exists in screening and prevention. Today, we are treating patients long after they've been afflicted with a disease. One of the panelists was speaking earlier about tumors, but we have now access to genomics. We have access to so many other modalities. There's not enough money being spent. I'm sure I have people who would agree with me here on antimicrobial testing, for example. So lends itself well to automation, could make a huge difference to an entire population, but not enough is being done there.
No, thank you, Shravan. I think as a next step, we will block a meeting room for you to address the cynics. I think
I can just add to that,
yeah,
just about the opportunity, for people to pay for it. And I'll maybe share my own experience that data, is truly a big opportunity, especially in diagnostics, because everything is data. And my personal experience over the last, I would say, 10 years has been that we've worked with 2 dedicated data management companies. And I can see that their customer base has significantly increased over the last 10 years, where 2 aspects. One is the ability to cull out anonymized data so that privacy is not an issue, and give it back to clinicians. And second is to use that data to actually improve compliance in chronic disease management. So if I send data back to the individual saying, here I'm here to help you, make you healthier by, following certain protocols. So I see a lot more opportunities coming up in that area. And I see a lot more people willing to say, yes, I think I want to be a part of this journey. So I think even that I see people moving up the curve and the willingness to invest and then, to monetize on that data eventually.
That's very encouraging. No, thank you, Sanjay. And I guess one thing which we can't be cynical about really is, access, affordability. And Sriram, maybe I can address this to you, but I think the foundational journey of MallBio has been at some level to solve for the challenges of access and affordability. And if you could talk about some of the challenges on the ground and maybe intersperse that with, your journey at MallBio and how you've tried to address these, I think that'll be some good insight for the audience.
See, there's a big dichotomy in the healthcare delivery in India, for example, and maybe it's true for most of the developing countries. So you have a majority of the population who don't have access to healthcare. So in India, the statistics say that 20% of the population are the ones who really have good access, and 80% population don't have access to good quality healthcare. So that's a big divide by itself, and that's a big challenge that needs to be solved. Is it getting solved by the existing, technologies available? It's not getting solved. So clearly, we need to use your word, leapfrog, and find different solutions which will reach healthcare to the rest of the population. And so if you say universal access to health, we need to find solutions. So that's where we have been focusing on. So clearly, a centralized system can work only for 20% population. So unless you decentralize, the rest of the population is not going to get the benefit, right? So decentralization has been the core of our work to try and see how we can take technologies to the people rather than people coming to centralized locations, and ensure that the healthcare seeking behavior changes and people are getting practically healthcare next door, right? So one such area which was crying for attention was infectious diseases, because it's a major issue in India, as we were talking about, and the time taken for somebody to get diagnosed for an infectious disease. So under the centralized kind of a system, normally it takes a fairly long time, depending on where you are located, and sometimes it can be even up to a week before you get really diagnosed for your disease. And by the time it's already, get too late, let's say. And the physicians don't want to wait for the time. So the empirical treatment starts, and then the patient goes through all the morbidity that goes along with it. So that's where we came in the picture, right? In my first company, Tulip, that we founded, we were very clear that we have to have technologies which can actually be translated to the tier 2, tier 3, and probably even lower down the healthcare chain. So that was a focus in Tulip, and we made a lot of technologies. And in fact, one of the tests that we created was the test for malaria, which is RDT. And at that time, it was a revolutionary product. And globally, we had a monopoly for a long time because it completely changed the paradigm in the way malaria testing was done and impacted the malaria programs worldwide. So that was a great success, and that propelled us to look at more and more solutions that we can offer to this kind of an audience. And then we thought about molecular diagnostics. So it's very clear that RDTs and immunodiagnostic tools can go only to a certain extent because they have limitations of sensitivity and specificity. And whereas molecular tools are really the gold standard technology for diagnosing infectious disease. But just because this molecular diagnostics itself was a highly centralized model, it was never used clinically. There was no clinical application of it. Nobody used to ask for a molecular test. And especially for diseases like tuberculosis, where the current technologies were not working, there was a big need to decentralize this. That's where we started work in MolBio and developed this technology called TrueNat. Took us about 15 years to do it. And this technology, of course, is not only for tuberculosis, it's a multi-disease platform. But this enables now a molecular test to be done practically independent of a laboratory. You can do a molecular test anywhere, right? So that's the kind of decentralization we could achieve with this platform. Today, the Indian TB program is using it all over in about 5,000 centers across India. And globally, there are about 1,500 centers using it for global TB programs. So it's been some kind of a no-brainer to say that you have to replace microscopy, the current method, because it's not good enough. And the only way you can do it is by molecular, and only if that's going to be a point-of-care solution. So now we are building on this concept and trying to see what more we can do in this area and how we can deliver more solutions to the lower levels, the peripheral levels of the population. So it came to us that, so we have already done what we have to do in the molecular side, and this will keep growing in terms of number of diseases. But what new platforms can come up? And one area which struck us was, we can do a molecular test now at a peripheral level, but you can't do a simple thing like a CBC, which is a basic test that's required, right? And for that, people still have to come to a laboratory. So now we're just about to launch a technology where we're using AI tools and a digital microscope to actually do CBC at the point of care. So now you can do CBC, again, completely independent of a laboratory. It just reads a slide, and that's also a microfluidic slide, automatic staining, and so on. And you get your CBC report within 2 minutes interpreted from the cloud through an AI algorithm. And it's as good as a 5-part differential that you get from a big cell counter that is there in a central laboratory. So similarly, we're looking at other options that we can do. So we're trying to talk about a next generation sequencing platform that can be done at the point of care for antimicrobial resistance, a platform that can do chemistry at the point of care, dry chemistry, so on. So our focus now is more on trying to see what solution we can provide so that we can actually reach a lot more healthcare to people and package that into different solutions. One could be just to populate the peripheral centers like the primary healthcare centers, but also have mobile solutions, right? So this could be mobile e-clinics as we call them, and they can have all the testing platforms which are portable and capable of being deployed, and then connect them to the cloud and have a teleconsulting capability so that you can link it to a nodal hospital. And so all the diagnostics can go to the people because it's a mobile e-clinic. You can go up to a village level. People can be enrolled. You can have an EMR for them, do a teleconsulting, do all the diagnostics there, and the physician can just issue a e-prescription, right? And patients can take their medicines. So that sort of connects the last mile where people really are struggling to get healthcare. So these are kind of solutions where we are trying to go out and come out with out-of-the-box solutions, in a way leapfrogging, as we call it.
No, thank you. I think these are multiple examples of leapfrogging in India to solve a very unique, set of constraints and opportunities. I think one more topic I'd want to touch upon on the state of play of where we are today is, what we typically call the consumerization of diagnostics, or the fact that, diagnostics are moving outside the lab, outside the hospital, outside the home in many cases. And maybe a good example of that is, this patch that I see on the back of the arm of a lot of people. It could be diabetics managing their comorbid conditions, or it could be health enthusiasts trying to manage their, their fitness and health better, the continuous glucose monitor or the CGM. Shravan, you're not just a expert in the industry, you're also a fitness enthusiast, so maybe you can cover this from both perspectives. But, I mean, just tell us, is the CGM a fad? Is this data clinically relevant? And what more can be done with devices like the CGM and with the data it generates? And do you see that as being, something meaningful in terms of adoption, or, something that's more perhaps a flash in the pan?
Sure, Ashish. I think you bring up a great point. And for those of you who haven't read it yet, I'd highly recommend this book called Outlive by Dr. Peter Attia, who dedicates an entire section of the book to CGMs and how they can have a role in improving outcomes, clinical outcomes, and then eventually longevity and quality of life. Now, if you consider diabetes, since you mentioned CGM, let's look at diabetes. And depending on which book you look at, you have to, ideally, the testing frequency, if you're a diabetic, has to be almost daily, right? A couple of times a day, fasting and postprandial when you have the device. In India, it is probably done maybe once a month, once in 2 months. So we're just looking at a huge gap in terms of compliance, adherence to testing protocol for a diabetic. But CGM does away with that, need to have a needle stick and take this test. You're monitoring the patient constantly. And it has measurable clinical outcomes that are, over a period of time, the HbA1c of a patient is going to reduce considerably just by having that information, making that available to the patient, to the clinician, and having all the tools of clinical decision that are that come alongside it. Pair that with information that's coming from fancy watches such as yours, and you get a lot of information on your cardiovascular health and other attributes of your fitness, which are an absolute essential tool for you to have to prevent diseases from coming in the first place, and then to manage and monitor them pretty well. The obvious question would be, okay, how much does this cost? Is it worthwhile? And in India, a CGM tool costs under 10,000 rupees, and the consumables that you keep adding to it will set you back. I think it's about ₹1,00,000 a year, maybe plus or minus. And that might be out of reach for the common individual. But there have been multiple health economic studies that have been published, mostly in the US, whatever I've come across, where there is a very clear health economic benefit to utilizing continuous monitoring tools. So I'm definitely a fan of it, and I would love to see this in more therapeutic areas. Multiple chronic diseases would lend themselves to continuous monitoring. Even cancer, if you're looking at minimal residual disease, Can this be monitored on a more continual basis through a wearable or through other devices that could have a very significant outcome for patients and a population at large?
Got it. Got it. No, that's actually quite helpful and insightful to know, and a book that I need to read clearly. I'll move to the second part of the conversation, which is technological advancements, and we've already kind of dipped our toes into that already. And maybe Sanjay, I could address this one to you. Could you touch upon what's next for the laboratory diagnostics industry? And maybe 2-3 parts to that question. One is, when we think about molecular testing, genetic testing, do you think that this is going to become ubiquitous over the next few years or remain relatively niche? And secondly, beyond blood testing, do you also see whether it's sputum or urine or other forms of testing also taking off? Could you touch upon what do you think will play out over the next few years?
So I think, let me give it in maybe a simple example. So when I did my thesis during pathology, I did in oncology, cervical cancer, and we did routine special stains to classify cancers. My daughter recently completed her MD path. She used only genomic markers to classify and artificial intelligence to classify tumors. So that's how it has changed over the last almost 30 years, that the whole classification of tumors, what we used to look at under a microscope or look at common stains, is now completely based on genomic categorization. And I think that's where the industry is really moving. The whole healthcare, I mean, that chapter was not even there in my books at that time, and now I just took the book the other day and asked my daughter, she said, you read this book and you will understand that. So that's how it has actually changed significantly. So I think the genomic basis of disease is going to become ubiquitous, as you said. I think it is already there. It will make healthcare more, the decision making will be more informed. While you have your clinical skills and you have your experience, but you also have data to validate that. And so my wish list or my vision for this is that maybe 10 years down the line, and as the cost of next generation sequencing has rapidly come down and hopefully will come down further, can every newborn get a whole genome sequencing done? And that data is available on the cloud. And then that individual also gets a whole genome sequencing done maybe 30 years later. So when you go to a doctor to be diagnosed and treated, first the doctor knows, based on your genomic profile, what are you more prone for, what is the kind of screening that needs to be done more in your case. So decision making is data driven and informed. Then there's no trial and error. Between 4 of us, 2 of us may respond to a drug, 2 of us may not. Today it's, if all 4 of us are diabetic, the same treatment is given to all 4 of us. But if we had that information, the doctor would be able to take a better decision that, okay, I can give these 2 the medication because they will respond, and these 2 I don't need to give this, I can give something else. So I think the entire decision-making process will become more data-driven, become more objective, and more informed. So I think the ability to take decisions will become that much better. So I think clearly the ecosystem is going to move towards that. But like I said, India is a land of extremes. We have 50% of complications in pregnancy that are due to low hemoglobin. Now, can every pregnant woman have an access to a CBC during her pregnancy and for decision making to be made so that her hemoglobin is above 10? I think that's one extreme. So I think there is that need at the bottom of the pyramid, which still needs to be addressed. And I think companies like his company are looking at doing that. How do you make sure that maternal mortality can be reduced by just getting sure that the hemoglobin of every pregnant woman is above 10? Can be done. I think it's about distribution. And the other side, what I spoke about, the need to continuously evolve the way healthcare is evolving. So you are able to take decision making more objectively, more informed, based on individual genomic profiling, so that there's no trial and error, and the doctors are able to take better decisions in managing their patients. So I think there are two sides, and the opportunity exists both sides.
Got it. And if I could actually draw some inspiration from that, and maybe we could do one rapid fire question, which is if each of you could talk about, maybe one or two areas at most that you think today there is a large unmet need, and it fundamentally can only be addressed through technological innovation or cost structure innovation, that could be a spark that someone in the audience could take away from and maybe plan a solution around. Any particular areas that come to mind?
One was what we've been talking about since morning, about the huge supply demand gap. How do you address it? Is it going to happen with conventional methods, or do you have to look at it unconventionally? So we spoke about radiologists, right? There are only about 6,000 radiologists, totally insufficient for the population. So AI is already starting to play a role there. So you can now take chest X-rays and interpret them through AI. Started with tuberculosis, but it's now being used for COVID. It's being used for a lot of other lung conditions. Today, AI can indicate about almost close to 12 to 13 different lung conditions which can be reported, and based on which clinical decisions can be taken. It means that even if you don't have a technician at that place, you can still have an AI to give you a report, and that image can be sent to a radiologist if required for confirmation. So these radiologists who are sitting remotely can actually report remotely, and so to that extent, you don't need radiologists everywhere, for example, right? And this area is sort of growing, so apart from chest images, you can do any part of the body images through AI interpretation. Today, you can interpret CT scans through AI. You can even interpret MRI images through AI. So the field is growing quite a bit. I think this is going to bring a big change in the way we are able to address this big gap between supply and demand. And probably we don't need more radiologists after that, right? So these kind of changes are happening, and I'm saying as we go along, technology is going to play a big role, and artificial intelligence, machine learning kind of tools, and as I said, decentralized kind of models will definitely change the way overall healthcare is being delivered.
So, go ahead.
So I think, I've been evangelizing a concept which I call unburdened healthcare. And this unburdened healthcare is this gap between demand and supply. So either you reduce the demand or increase the supply, or do both. And I think the first panel spoke about it, that, how do you tell people what to do, but how do you also tell people what not to do? How do you make sure that what can be taken care at the primary healthcare level can be taken care? How do you take care of something which can be done at the OPD so you don't have to do it at the IPD level? So I'm looking at an opportunity where you create a triaging platform. And there's a company I spoke to the other day. Currently, they're just trying to meet the demand and supply. But I think if you can build a triaging opportunity where somebody who has a muscle spasm at the back does not need to go and see a spine surgeon, but can just get physiotherapy done. So how do you create a platform that can triage and then filter out what can be managed outside the hospital, so that what genuinely needs to be managed in the hospital can be managed? So I think that is a huge opportunity today, and maybe together somebody here can build that, and I'm happy to share, because as a lab professional, every doctor would have to go through the lab to go to the patient. Every patient had to go to the lab to go back to the doctor. So I had that vantage point of being able to sort of be a concierge between the two. Now, if we can, use that blueprint of a concierge and make a tech platform out of it, so people know what to do and what, very important, what not to do. I think that is missing in healthcare today, of telling people what not to do, so that you don't get over-treated, you don't get over-diagnosed, you don't get intervention done when it's actually not required. So that will sort of reduce the burden on the healthcare ecosystem.
So both Sriram and Sanjay have suggested that we need fewer clinicians. And I'm a third-generation physician. My father and grandfather were pathologists, and I think the way they practiced medicine or pathology is completely different from what we see today. And well-known radiologist has often quipped that a radiologist who doesn't embrace AI is going to be put out of business very soon, right? It's not that AI is going to put radiologists out of business, but radiologists who embrace AI will. We have a lot to thank actually to the video games industry, right? Thanks to them, we've accelerated technology in communications, whether it's 5G, and also for that matter, microprocessing power has come, mainly was driven by gaming technology. Now you put these powerful tools together, and to Sanjay's point, a lot of what was done in the hospital could be done remotely, right? Even take surgical procedures, can and will and are already being assisted a lot by AI tools. So if the future of the hospital could be very different. It could be more like a hotel that's renting services, and a combination of communication technology, robotic technology, and well-trained clinicians and support staff could transform the patient experience.
No, and I think these are great examples, and two of you spoke about AI and ML, and I'm just trying to draw parallels to the SaaS panel, which also spoke about leveraging capabilities, talent. I think we have an abundance of clinical talent and an abundance of capability to work with the AI models and build solutions that are fit for purpose in India, but also potentially globally. So I think there is some commonality there. And so a couple of questions I do want to throw out are more for now the entrepreneurs in the audience. Sriram, maybe one to you. You're of course addressing challenges in India, but you're also building MallBio to be a global company. Could you talk about the experience of taking an Indian medtech company global? What are some of the challenges? What are some of the learnings?
Well, Make in India itself is a challenge because it's very tough to sell an Indian product outside of the country, and especially when you're competing with European and US companies, even Chinese companies for that matter. In the biotech side, in the medical device side, India is still not viewed as a great innovator and provider of services. So it took us a long time to convince the global audience that we have probably as good or a better technology than what is currently available. Had to go through a lot of validations, had to spend a lot of time and efforts, and many times there are a lot of efforts to somehow try and throw us out of the picture. And so we still have to keep fighting. So it was a lot of fight. So it took quite a long time. But today, finally, they have to accept us as a player because we have proved ourselves. And it's actually impacting. So it has been tough, but it's been worth all the while because now we're in about 45 countries. And all these countries are able to do the same kind of job we're doing here, decentralized, molecular testing. And so to that, and the kind of feedbacks now we are getting from them and the kind of impact stories that are coming out are very encouraging. So it's a happy situation, but it did take a long time. Second issue is the regulatory processes. Every country has its own regulatory process, and there's totally non-uniform kind of a structure. So you have to keep doing this again and again for every country. So you need to have a lot of resources and a lot of patience to do all this. So it is a tough and a long-drawn affair. But once you do it, then of course it's, I think, a nice feeling to be able to have an Indian product for global healthcare.
And so the muscle you developed in the 15 years of developing MallBio was helpful in taking it global as well.
You can say that.
Got it. And I guess, the other question, if I was to wear the Indian entrepreneur hat, and Shravan, maybe I can address this to you, is if I look at diagnostic products, there is a proliferation of global companies which are really, kind of seen as market leaders. When you think about Indian medtech founders, are there areas that you think, Indian companies can meaningfully compete or win against global companies, and equally areas where Indian medtech companies can partner with global MNCs that could create synergies and growth as well?
Certainly, Ashish. I think several white spaces exist where Indian companies can compete in India for India as well as in India for the world. For the last, I'd say, couple of decades, most of the MNCs that have been coming into India are either just subsidizing the cost of a product and saying, okay, I'll make it affordable for India. At the next level, they said, okay, we'll strip down some features to make it more affordable. But the truly innovative ones are those that develop a product from scratch, considering the needs of the Indian patient, the Indian infrastructure, the vast expanse of the geography, the skill gap that we have, and then innovate a product that is fit for purpose. I think Sriram's is a great example there of what he's done in India for India, which can then be extrapolated to other countries. I think another opportunity is to consider the therapeutic areas that affect Indians the most. We had the national medical, the policy, national medical policy came up about 5-6 years ago, where there was a focus on chronic diseases, on oncology, on maternal and child health, and of course, infectious diseases. I'm also to that going to add neurodegenerative, because as a population we are aging and we're going to see a lot of clinical opportunity there. I think we are in India blessed with terrific mechanical engineering and electrical engineering capabilities. We have some pretty robust academic healthcare institutions. I think all of them need to come together. It's not a play of one company. I think the entire ecosystem has to come in. R&D has not been an area of focus for most of these universities. Many of the companies reverse engineer a product and try to commercialize them. But I think some core R&D work needs to be done. A lot of effort needs to be put into, and in my previous role with GE, we worked with a lot of the universities, right? And they were able to produce products that solved a mechanical or an electrical problem. But they needed a lot of work and mentorship to make them actually usable. So in terms of the UI, UX of a product, I think there lies an opportunity for us to leapfrog, or at least be more contemporary. I think MNCs can partner with startups in many ways. So it's not just for finished goods for an entire product, but you can look at the data play. There's also contract manufacturing for subcomponents and specific parts. So a lot, right? Software, hardware, product development, product design, all these opportunities exist for startups to get involved, raise capital themselves or partner with MNCs. I think agility will be key, because the large companies lack that. Over time, they become quite bureaucratic, and they're not able to do as much as they would like. So agility, I think, is a huge opportunity for the startups, but I think quality and safety are an absolute must before they take the conversation to MNCs.
Got it.
Rashi, just to maybe close the loop on the last question about from an entrepreneur's point of view, and because this is a forum on investments in healthcare or opportunities of investment. So, I think for the right reasons, COVID has triggered a lot of interest for people to want to be part of the healthcare ecosystem. That's great. But I've also seen many people who get into healthcare, and I ask everyone who starts a new healthcare company, what was your trigger to get into healthcare? Why did you choose? And they're not a medical More often than not, it's a personal challenge or a personal experience that has pushed people into healthcare. I think passion is important, but if you're not solving a problem at the root, at the core, then I've seen many of them actually lose that momentum. And as Sriram said, you need a lot of patience and perseverance to, make it work in healthcare. It's not a quick fix. So I think it's very important that people who want to, get into healthcare entrepreneurship understand why they want to do it. Are they solving a core problem or not? And are they willing to stick it out for a long run? And I think the investors who are also backing them up should probably look at these three aspects as well, that, just because I went through a personal experience, do I have the ability to see it through? Do I know what I'm trying to solve? And do I have the patience and perseverance? Not all have that. And I've seen some people just lose that steam and momentum. I think I just feel that, it's important to ask these questions as well.
No, absolutely, absolutely. No, thank you, Sanjay. I'd like to thank the three of you for taking out the time. It's great to get not just the depth of perspective you've shared, but also your own experiences, the personal story of how you've kind of seen this evolve, and your take on opportunities and challenges. So thank you.